right, folks, welcome back to Gun Owners Radio, FM 96.1, AM 1170.
The Answer.
Jake Wiskerchen from Walk the Talk America is up next to talk about myths and misconceptions around mental health and gun ownership.
But first, self-defense and emergencies can happen to anyone, and there's no guarantee that the justice system will be on your side. Make sure you are protected for the legal battle after your self-defense battle. And while you protect your family and property, U.S. Law Shield is here to defend you 24/7, 365 days a year with a comprehensive self-defense coverage at an affordable price. Bad guys don't take days off, and neither does our coverage. Hey, listeners, you can get a free T-shirt when you use promo code Gun Owners Radio. So sign up today. Go to uslawshield.com.
So the theme for the month is mental health, and we've talked about that with a few of our guests. And our next guest, Jake Wiskerchen, is with Walk the Talk America, and we're going to talk to him about what Walk the Talk America is and a little bit about red flag laws. Jake, how you doing, man?
Gentlemen, it is absolutely my pleasure. I am doing fantastically up here in Reno, Nevada. How are you both?
Great. All doing well. Doing very, very well.
Good.
Yeah. So tell us everything. What do we need to know? What exactly does Walk the Talk America do?
Well, I believe you're going to have its founder on in the next segment, but I'm going to give a brief overview. So what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between firearms ownership and mental health. And the story is basically Mike founded the organization following a tragedy in his own life, and he says we've got to do something to eliminate firearm suicides. So at our core, we're a suicide prevention organization. But broadly, what we want to do is we want to invite firearms owners in to get the counseling care that they likely need to prevent such suicides, and along the way, heal marriages and improve parenting and all sorts of things by demystifying what counseling is. And then along with that, we teach some cultural competence courses to clinicians so that they're better equipped to use proper language with gun owners when they come in to counseling, and we don't scare them off, because a lot of us in my profession are a little bit ignorant, if not a lot ignorant, about what it means to be a gun owner. And so when I hooked up with Mike a couple of years ago, I thought this was a great opportunity, a great organization, and I had something to offer. But what it meant was I had to come out of the closet as a firearms owning clinician, and I did so, and it's been great. I haven't looked back. It's been awesome. I've really integrated in the gun community, and so that's in a nutshell, that's what we do. We offer lots of things, and I can get into that if you'd like. But
well, let's talk about your background. You say what does that mean to be a clinician, or tell us everything there is to know about your background.
Sure. So I'm licensed as a marriage and family therapist in the state of Nevada, and when we talk about mental health practitioners or mental health clinicians or mental health professionals, they're basically all interchangeable, but there are several different licenses that you can get to practice. One is marriage and family therapy, one is professional counselor, another is clinical social worker. Everybody's heard of psychologists and psychiatrists, and their license scopes allow them to do different things. I can't prescribe medicine. That's left to the psychiatrists. They are medical doctors. But everybody else basically does counseling, talk therapy, psychotherapy. We can call it a bunch of different things. And you get a license by the state to practice. That allows you typically to bill insurance. So I go into network with, say, Anthem or United or whatever, and you come into my place. You say, hey, Jake, I got a problem with whatever I got a problem with. Let's sit down and talk about it. We formulate a treatment plan, and then we execute that treatment plan to attain the objectives to the goal. So if your goal is to stop drinking so much or be less angry or whatever, we should be able to measure this over time. And then eventually you grow and evolve, and you get discharged just like we would with any other physical therapy, from surgery to learning to play basketball again after an accident.
Wow. What is? I've heard that. I think you said psychotherapy and talk therapy, and it sounded like those are the same thing. I'm hearing talk therapy a lot lately. What exactly is talk therapy, and what's the difference between talk therapy and psychotherapy?
There isn't really. It's just a matter of preference with the person who's using the terminology. So we could say counseling, too. It's the same type of thing. But essentially, you come in, something's going sideways in your life, and it's not of a physical nature, right? Physical nature, we go to the primary care doctor and we get some sort of other treatment plan, whether it's, learning to strengthen your hand, or we give you some medicine, or we cast up your broken bone. Well, the analogy applies across the board to something that's not of a physical nature. It's of a mental nature, right? So this may be a series of pattern behaviors in your life that you're not happy with. It's not getting the results you want. If you've been exposed to trauma history, for example, that's not something the doctor can just throw a pill at you and get rid of. You come into my shop and, one of my clinicians or myself will talk to you over a series of interactions. And what we're doing is we're challenging your worldview. We're challenging the way that you do things and offering new opportunities to look at the world, change your behaviors. And that can run the gamut from journaling to getting back into church to being more intimate and, with your spouse or whatever, all to achieve your goal. So there's a lot of ways we can do that. My personal bailiwick tends to be emotional functioning. I've got a bunch of emotional functioning YouTube videos that I send out to everybody because I think really at the end of the day, even though I have the license to practice and I got all these, this graduate degree and these thousands of hours, I believe that I can teach anybody to do this in their own life. And ultimately, I want to work myself out of a job. I don't want to just keep people in counseling in perpetuity so I, pay my bills or whatever. I want to see people healed. I want to live in a healthy community.
And you're also tell us about your gun background. Have you been a gun owner your whole life, or what's your experience with firearms ownership?
I have, yeah. So I grew up in a family full of cops, and it's a little bit of an interesting story. So I endeavored to be a police officer at one point myself, but family full of cops, always owned guns. We hunted, born and raised in Nevada. I'm fifth generation Reno, and the gun was always seen as a tool for something. It was never recreation. It wasn't sport. It wasn't competition. We didn't collect them. And so for me, my guns just kind of stayed in the closet and came out whenever I needed to use them. Several years ago, I ended up getting my CCW permit here in Nevada and started carrying. But then in 2019, I have a friend here who operates his mother's range and retail store. It's called Reno Guns and Range. They're very, very good. And he and I have been friends since college, and we've been talking about this guns and mental health thing for quite some time. And one day he texted me, asked me if I knew of Walk the Talk America. I hadn't, looked him up. And I was hosting a mental health podcast at the time. I still have it. It's called Noggin Notes. And so I reached out to WTTA. Mike replied and said, hey, you need to be on my podcast. This is a really cool topic. You guys are doing something that nobody else is doing. We hit it off. We became friends. And then I got immersed into the gun community. So our board of directors is very well established in the firearms community. Ashley Lubinsky, I know you just had her on the show a couple weeks back, and
we did. She's
now on our board, along with Colleen Noir and Rob Pincus. And these guys have been like incredibly gracious in shepherding me along through the culture. So, when I went to SHOT a couple of years ago, it was like I walked in and I didn't really understand gun culture because I wasn't a part of it. And then I went, oh, now I get it. This is like so multifaceted. It was really easy for me to sink right in. And then I started teaching people what I know about mental health and how the two can coexist in the same space.
Interesting. So how does the public understand mental health?
I don't think they do. I think we've got several problems. One is that we ourselves as clinicians, as professionals who've lived in the shadows for so long, we end up perpetuating the stigma. You hear all this stuff about mental health stigma and end the stigma. Well, I happen to believe that we contribute to a lot of that by doing things like not acknowledging our patients in public. That's a big one that I think is nonsense, and we need to end that.
Not acknowledging, like if you're at the grocery store and you see one of your patients, you just keep walking.
They actually teach us this in grad school. It's like, if you see your patient in Costco, it's like turn your cart and go down the other aisle. Which nobody does that in any other profession that holds sensitive information. My dentist doesn't do that. My orthopedist doesn't do that. My attorney doesn't do that. So we make it uncomfortable. We make it weird. So that's one thing.
Wow.
Culture and media historically have painted mental health in a bad light. One flew over the cuckoo's nest and all that stuff. But then also we've got this new explosion of teletherapy companies, Talkspace and BetterHelp and all that stuff that basically say to the public, hey, download our app, text in, get your mental health treated, and that's a complete misrepresentation of what it takes. What it takes is long-term commitment. So we're fighting a lot of battles, and I think a lot of it's misunderstood, from diagnostics to treatment to discharge. It's just very hard.
So what's the biggest myth or misconception?
Well, I think these days the battle that I find myself fighting is that everybody has mental illness, and it's not true. That's a big myth. Just because you have a hard time in your life doesn't mean that you meet diagnostic criteria for mental illness. But that's what's being pushed by a lot of these companies so that they can capture business. And I think it's wrong. I think it's unethical. But boy, it sure does, get people in the door. So we've seen a lot of youth mental health issues, and I put that in air quotes that the audience can't see because we're on radio, but mental health issues, right? It's like everybody's mentally ill these days. It's like, well, maybe not. Maybe, response to governmental lockdowns and disease nobody's seen before is supposed to be distressed. Like, you're supposed to be distressed when you don't know what's happening. You're supposed to be on your heels and a little anxious and nervous when government keeps being inconsistent with the way that it's handling things. That's not necessarily mental illness. But that's the message being sent, is like, oh, you got mental illness because you're worried or you're anxious. Like, get into care. And then, of course, we're fighting social media too, TikTok and stuff.
That seems to be a big part. Where the line is, like, how do you determine where the line is? Seems to be a big part of. It seems to be, I don't want to say a big part of the problem, but it seems to be a big discussion point. That seems to be that probably is the issue. Where is the line drawn between someone who's having a bad day or a bad week or a bad month, or someone that's not feeling up to par, and someone that has something diagnosable? Are you able, in a few sentences, are you able to define where the line's drawn, or is that why you're a professional?
No, actually I can. So we have a book. It's called the DSM, that's short for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and then subtitled Of Mental Disorders. So in that book, we've got all the criteria that we need to meet. So you asked about where the line's drawn. Usually it's on a time frame. How long has this been going on? We can look at that. We can look at certain symptom presentations. But before we even get to the diagnosis and the diagnostic criteria, we open the book, and like a few pages in, it says what a mental disorder is. And the operative language in there is clinically significant distress or impairment in one or more important areas of functioning. And some of the important areas of functioning are social, marital, legal, medical, et cetera, occupational, academic. So if you don't have clinically significant distress or impairment, you're not qualifying yourself for a mental illness diagnosis.
Okay,
hang out right there. We got to go to a commercial.
Yeah.
We were both trying to figure out when we could stick our foot in the door, but you were just too good. Hey, does selling your home feel overwhelming? Well, it doesn't have to be that way. With Scott Vinson from Caldwell Banker Royal Realty, Scott Vinson is the perfect guide to help you sell or buy your home. Scott has also been a San Diego County Gun Owner board member from the start. So if you're moving, let fellow Second Amendment supporter and real estate broker Scott Vinson help you sell your home and find your new home anywhere in the United States. Call him today at 619-948-2459. Tell him you heard about it on Gun Owners Radio. Again, give Scott a call at 619-948-2459, or you can get him online at scottvinson.com. That's VINSON.
We're talking to Jake Wiskerchen from Walk the Talk America about mental health. So, what would most people be surprised to learn about mental health, Jake?
I think they'd probably be surprised to learn that it's much easier and a lot less threatening than people make it out to be. So part of what I want to do with firearms owners specifically, but then other professions broadly who are skeptical or are afraid to come in, is demystify what the process is. One of the things, and I know you guys want to discuss this, is the care barriers that exist to accessing my services. One is this appearance that we're going to pick up the bat phone to the government and tattle on you, and you're going to lose your Second Amendment rights because you're struggling with something. That's not true. And we have lots of protections built in against that ethically and legally. So even if we take a state like, say, New Jersey, it has a red flag law that is very broad and says that, quote unquote, any person can petition the court for an extreme risk protection court order, doesn't mean that we can or should professionally. And if we break your confidentiality for that reason, we better have a really darn good reason to do it, because we could jeopardize our license by doing that. So I think one of the things people are always pleased to see is when they get into care, how easy and non-threatening it is, but then what the protections are against sharing their stuff with the public or courts or emergency services and whatnot. Those conditions are very, very rare.
And it does come up. I've definitely gotten that question, particularly with CCWs. We started we now have the ability in San Diego to get a CCW for the first time in decades, and there's
congratulations.
We worked really hard on that. We're very happy. There's at least one question that has to do with mental health, and I get a lot of questions, kind of off the record questions about that. Well, gee, I've done this, or I have this in my history, or this is going on in my life. Is that something I should disclose? And there is a very real fear. Have you seen a lot of that? Have you seen people who don't get help with mental health issues because they're a gun owner?
Oh my gosh, that's the whole reason the organization exists.
Wow.
It's staggering. So I mentioned I come from a family full of cops, but I also teach law enforcement. I teach the Crisis Intervention Training Week, and I work very intimately with them. But it's not just cops. It's firefighters, EMTs, emergency room doctors, basically anybody in a profession who would go seek help, regardless of whether or not they own firearms. They're skittish about coming into care because they don't want to be deemed by their colleagues or their superiors or supervisors to be unfit for duty. And that's a real scare. Here's my analogy, and I stole this from a colleague of mine, my clinical director. If you're in the military and you're going on a ruck and you turn your ankle and you think that it's going to be embarrassing or shameful or somebody's going to look at you weird by admitting that you need to get your ankle taped or looked at, what you end up doing while you're continuing on the ruck is you become a liability for everybody else on your team by not asking for help. And that's the message that I'm trying to push out is like, if you're really struggling, you're lacking sleep, you're showing up to work sluggish because you got anxiety about your kid being sick or whatever, that's okay. And what we need to do is push the message back up the chain to the supervisors and the bosses to say, if you don't get this person attended to, worse things will happen, up to and including suicide, which is a big deal in the medical community, as it turns out. So, yes, I see that all the time where people give their testimonies to us like, I don't trust it, I don't want to come in, I don't want my rights taken, I don't want to lose my job. And it is an uphill battle for sure.
Now, do you have guidance or do you guys publish guidance or give guidance at what point, at what point are guns taken away from somebody? Do you talk about whether or not that should be a family member or a friend, or, do you touch on that at all?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that stand in the way there. One is some of these quote unquote transfer laws. They're supposed to plug the loopholes or whatever, the gun show loopholes. And what they've essentially said, and Nevada just passed its in 2019, took effect in 2020, says I'm not allowed to give my guns to my neighbor unless he goes through a background check, and that obviously stands in the way of doing the right thing. There are some escape hatches written in the law, like the language says so long as temporary and necessary to fight the emergent situation or whatever. But the problem is those terms aren't defined. We don't know how long temporary is. We don't know how long as reasonable is defined. So is it 3 days? Is it 30 days? We don't know. And people are afraid to do the right thing because they don't want to become felons, or in Nevada, gross misdemeanors. And so in the middle of doing the right thing, trying to get the guns out of somebody's home, there's this mental block like, well, I don't want to take your guns. So yes, we absolutely have that conversation with people about what are your options, right? Can we change the lock on the safe? Can we turn it over to your wife or whatever if you're struggling? One one thing that Rob Pincus talks about greatly is take an operable part of the gun in that moment of crisis that's not going to make anybody a felon. Take the bolt carrier group. Take the bolt. Take the slide. And what we're trying to do is this is something that Walk Talk talks about too, is do cause a pause. It's a little bit hashtag campaign there is cause a pause, because we know that suicide is often impulsive. And if we can just cause a pause, if that mechanical part is missing, can you go down to the store and buy a new one? Yeah, of course you can. But the time it takes for you to go there should be time enough for me to make you reconsider doing it. So we talk about all those kinds of things, but we also talk about responsible storage. And we're trying to redefine the word responsible to mean preventing unauthorized access. And somebody who might be unauthorized is that person who's in a moment of crisis, whether it's through medication or illness or mental illness. Also children, angsty teenager just got his heart broken by his girlfriend breaking up with him. He shouldn't have access to the guns. I don't care how old he is or how responsible you've trained him to be. So we start to have those conversations too.
So with regard to treatment course, what should listeners understand that they don't understand right now?
Treatment should be time limited. That's the first thing I want to say. Mental illness, we say this in the podcast too. We have a little lead into our podcast called Guns. People can check that out if they want. But in the lead-in, I say mental illness can and should be overcome, just like physical illness, right? So if you got a broken arm, we cast your broken arm, we set you up for 4 to 6 weeks, we take off the cast, and maybe there's some physical therapy afterward to re-strengthen the muscles. But the point is, you're not a broken arm anymore, and you don't identify as a broken arm. And mental illness, people identify as their diagnoses quite frequently. It's like, I am bipolar, I am ADHD. It starts to sound like a characterological trait, and that's not true. Diagnoses can and should change, and the illness should go away. And again, if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, remember the criteria that I mentioned?
Yeah.
If you're no longer meeting criteria, you don't have a mental illness anymore. So we want to be pushing that narrative too. Say, hey, get in, get treated, get out.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're saying that there is no mental health condition or diagnosis that is permanent. Is that accurate?
I don't believe so. We can have a debate about genetic components, and there is some merit to that. But beyond, blood work and structural deficiencies in the brain, which you can only access through an fMRI image, which you're going to have to go spend tens of thousands of dollars to get done, and you probably have to travel to get it done. Like, absent the organic issues, I believe that people don't come out of the womb broken. They come out whole, pure, clean, intact, and then they're sculpted over time to do whatever they do, meaning we can sculpt them differently later. You get a proper level of awareness and insight, you can start working differently. So just because you've been, a drunken, abusive jerk, for 20 years doesn't mean you have to keep being that way. If somebody brings it to your attention that this isn't working for you and you kind of sort of know internally it's not working, we can give you some alternatives. And then later you change. And I think, anybody who's listening, including you guys, me, we're not the same person now as we were 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. I mean, I certainly hope not. So if we can all change, that means that anybody struggling with a major issue can also change. And I think that inspires hope. So I take off the table the permanence of it, and we presume that change can happen until proven otherwise.
Wow. Well, I am woefully unqualified to have that debate, but I think it would be interesting. It just... I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that there is no mental health diagnosis or illness or condition. I'm trying to say the right words, but there is no mental health condition that is permanent. But then you also said, and I just want to clarify that if you're not showing the characteristics of the diagnosis, then it's no longer a thing. And I'm kind of paraphrasing, but. And I think what
correct. No, you're absolutely correct. Yep.
So if
absolutely. and we see this a lot with parents of children who bring them in and they're like, my kid's distracted and he's hyperactive and all this stuff. It's like, he must have ADHD. It's like, well, yeah, all right, cool. Maybe he does. Now what? We have to treat it. We have to do something different. We have to teach your kid patience and distress tolerance and to keep himself under control. And those things all can be done. I mean, any human being can change and evolve and, improve. I certainly am distractible. I go 100 miles an hour. But what I've done is I've managed to control it. It's not spastic anymore. I'm not in fourth grade blurting out answers to my fourth grade teacher and getting B's in citizenship, right? I've learned how to control that. And if I can do it, anybody can do it.
That's awesome, Jake. Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate this conversation. So. Walk the Talk. What's the website for Walk the Talk?
Yeah, WTTA.org, walkthetalkamerica.org. You could spell it out if you want, but it's WTTA.org. And if you want to see some of the videos I put out, Zephyr Wellness is my company, zephyrwellness.org, or our YouTube channel. And that's kind of a cool way to go. And then our podcast, Guns and Mental Health. Appreciate you guys having me on. God bless you for doing what you do and continuing the message, and Merry Christmas.
Thanks, man. Merry Christmas.
Thanks for watching this clip from Gun Owners Radio. You can watch us live every Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. California time, right here on our YouTube channel, or if you're in the San Diego area, you can listen to us on 1170 a.m. We're also available on your favorite podcast platform for free. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can help restore and protect the Second Amendment, not just in California, but across the country.